Hi, I'm Jane Anson. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Wine Podcast. And we are starting today the first in a new series of podcasts where we will be talking to authors. They might be authors of wine books specifically, or they're authors that simply love wine or use wine as a character within their books. And we are absolutely thrilled to be starting today with a hugely influential woman in my own wine journey, Petie Kladstrup. She's a multi-award-winning author of Wine and War, which she co-wrote with her husband, Don Kladstrup. Wine and War was written now a quarter of a century ago, but I would say of all of the books about wine that have really turned people on to the excitement and the interest of wine and the fact that it's more than just a drink. Wine and War is certainly one of the most important. Since Wine and War, they wrote two books about Champagne, one about the battle for France's greatest treasure, about Champagne triumphing over war and hard times, and since then, Champagne Charlie, which is about the story of Charles Heidsieck. Today's book is about Empress Eugénie, so a very kind of overlooked historical figure who was key to the 1855 classification. So again, a link with wine, but this is a biography that is really about so much more than wine. It's about this incredible historical figure that you will all enjoy getting to know. So please do come with us, enjoy this podcast, and let us know what you think. So first of all, Petie, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Great, especially having an opportunity to talk to you. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Thank you. We're thrilled for you to be here. So I want to talk about how Eugénie, who's such a fascinating character, found her way into your life, into the pages of your book, and I think we all hope into her rightful place back in history. But can we start off by saying you're the author of some of the best-loved wine books of all time, written, as I said, largely with your husband, Don Kladstrup. Now, I can tell you from multiple conversations that I've had over the years, Wine and War has got to be the book that has converted the most interested parties into true wine lovers. We look back now, it's 25 years since it was published. Can you tell us what has stayed with you most about the process of writing and research, and other things that you've discovered since that you kind of wish had been included?
First of all, Jane, I think that's the nicest compliment ever paid to Wine and War, so thank you very much for that. And indeed, looking back on it after nearly a quarter of a century, Don and I feel really, really lucky that we had a chance not only to write it, but to meet the people who were still around after the many years after World War II, who were able to share with us their stories, their struggles, who'd reached a point in their lives where they were ready to talk about it and to look back at those time period with enough perspective that they could see how much that experience meant to the rest of their lives, and give us an opportunity to find out all of the struggles they went through and yet how it impacted them in such a positive and strong way, because all of the people we spoke to were from families who now are very well known in the wine world, but at the time they were non-players essentially. So the war for them was a key moment, and it gave us an opportunity to share that with lots and lots of people.
Yeah, and you made two really important points there. One is it was really a taboo subject for many, many decades after. It was so painful for so many people that they didn't want to talk about it. So there had to be a certain amount of time passed before they were able to do so. And then the other thing is archives. Archives were sealed for many, many years. And obviously then they were open. So that in itself, that book couldn't have probably been written in the decades immediately following the war.
To a very large extent, that's true. And the archives were beginning to be opened when we wrote the book. It leaves us with one feeling, though, that now that more and more of them are open, it would be nice to go back and look a little more closely at the economic collaboration aspect of World War II, which we were able to do only in a limited way at that time for some of the archives. Already we had a lot of documents about economic cooperation and collaboration, but now, after the death of most of the people, there is a lot more that would be available.
Yeah, you're quite right. So fascinating topic, which I think never ceases to be of interest and importance. In the latest book that you're writing about Eugénie, so the Last Empress of France, you have moved from wine to biography, but you're still bringing to life a chapter of French history that, in my opinion, and I'm sure in yours, is actually often overlooked. And you're bringing to life a personality who hasn't necessarily been recognised in the way that she deserves. I'm interested to know what it is about those kind of stories that interest you. It's similar with the Wine and War and with Eugénie, finding those overlooked corners. What is it that you find so appealing?
It is the overlooked quality that makes them especially interesting and makes the stories very, very fascinating to us. And it is always, for us, one book that leads to another. And Eugénie grew out of the third book we did, Champagne Charlie, about Charles Heidsieck and how he introduced champagne to America. But in the process, he was arrested as a spy and put into prison during the U.S. Civil War. While he was imprisoned, his wife, worried about the business, worried about her family, took it upon herself to write to the Empress, to write to Eugénie and ask for help. I was so surprised that she thought, I'll write to the Empress rather than to the Emperor, that I spent some time looking up Eugénie to find out why. And then a bit of, synchronicity. I was chatting with my friend Evelyne and said, I've just looked up this woman. And Evelyne came back, Evelyne, who's an historian of 19th century France, came back and said, I've always found Eugénie far more interesting than her husband. And it was from that little conversation then that Evelyne and I went on to tackle the life of this very fascinating woman who was, by and large, left out of all history textbooks.
And that brings me very neatly to the next question. So you're used to writing with Don, and of course, your husband and wife know each other incredibly well, and I'm sure have a very good rhythm of how you work together. How was it moving to work to do, again, a joint project, but with a different person? I want to give a bit of background to listeners. Evelyne Resnick lives in Bordeaux as well. She's really a very wonderful person. I got to know her because we bonded over a book that she wrote in 1996, which was a biography about Leonard Bernstein, which is amazing, really wonderful. But it was a different challenge for you. So could you talk to us a bit about how that process was and how you split who was doing the work?
As you pointed out, in a relationship that's gone on with Don and me now for, I hate to admit to it, more than 50 years, you get to a point where you finish each other's sentences. You almost don't need to talk because the thoughts are moving in the same direction. So moving on to working with someone else, there was a lot more give and take. There was a lot more back and forth on ideas, on even words, an individual word. But the good news of it was that both Evelyne and I have written and worked with other people, worked closely with other people. Evelyne did one book several years ago with another winemaker. She worked in a business with her husband for a long period of time, because I've worked with Don for a long period of time. So we both had a really good idea of what a collaboration means, a collaboration not in the World War II sense, but a collaboration in a friendly sense. And our starting premise, which we wrote down and made very clear to each other, was that it was our friendship that came first, not the book. And then that the book had to be written in one voice, because if it were choppy, it would not work. It would not present the story we wanted it to, which meant that because I'm the native English speaker, I guess, a lot of the writing, most of the writing fell to me. After working with Evelyne, developing it, I did the polishing, the massaging at the end, with Evelyne as a very, very good guardian angel overlooking all that was going on.
Well, you did an amazing job, and I honestly can say I adored reading this book. I adored getting to know it, getting to know her. I read it in about 48 hours. I mean, when I like a book, I can't put it down, and that's how I felt about The Last Empress of France. And I also, I mean, I'm not on commission, but I honestly must have told 30 people over the weekend, you've got to read this book. Because in every page I was stopping to share a story about what she'd done. Eugénie was involved in so many important moments in France, and yet we know so little about her. So, for example, I didn't realise just how intimately connected she was to the creation of the haute couture industry in France. I also didn't realise, my daughter is just doing the baccalaureate, she's 17 years old, she just did her French baccalaureate this week, and how incredible to realise that mid-19th century, when women were kind of locked out of education, that Eugénie somehow managed to convince the French government to let a woman take the baccalaureate. So there was just, every page I was finding something else fascinating. What were some of your favourite moments in her life, and why do you think so many of her achievements have been forgotten?
The very short story, the very short answer to that is because she was a woman. We're talking about mid-19th century France, when France had perhaps the most restrictive laws in the world for women, which seems just extraordinary, because in the 18th century France had been a real leader in women's issues and women's rights. But Napoleon came along. Napoleon,
the crazy thing, the uncle of Napoleon III.
Yes, yes. And he was a real misogynist. He had no confidence, no interest in letting women do anything. And as a result, the Code Napoleon very largely limited what women were able to do. And that meant they could do only what their fathers or then their husbands said they could do. They had no rights to property, to financial independence of any sort. Very, very limited opportunity for any work outside the home. It's really strange because Napoleon III, his nephew, was raised by a very, well, should we say, liberated woman. His mother, who was the daughter of Napoleon Bonaparte's first wife, the famous Josephine, was a very, very forward-thinking woman. And I think that made him even more fascinated by Eugénie than anything else, because she was a very exciting woman with all kinds of ideas. Not only was she gorgeous, but she was able to think about things. She was fascinated by politics. She was fascinated by so many things that it was an attraction that led to the marriage, and led to his giving her a great deal of power, a great number of opportunities, and she did not hesitate to take advantage of them. The one you mentioned, the letting French women have the right to be educated, was perhaps the most amazing for the time and for France today. I mean, think of all of the things that wouldn't exist in France if it weren't for the women who came out and began doing things. But she used a technique that I think you find copied now today. The idea of finding one woman who was so obviously qualified, so obviously a brilliant woman, to sit down and take the Bach exam to prove that a woman actually could do this. This was a 30-some-year-old woman who was already, had been working all the jobs she could find, which essentially was being a governess, but spoke several languages. She was qualified in many areas, and yet they insisted that she had to go to... That's right, sit with a load of 17-year-old boys. And take the exam with 17-year-old boys, exactly the same one. She went through the whole thing, and of course got the highest grades ever, so that it became clear that they had to let women be educated. But what I found really fascinating about that is because this technique of finding one person to be the symbol and making it happen through her... Don, my husband, is an avid baseball fan and was a great baseball player. in American baseball, this was the same technique that was used to integrate baseball, to bring in black Americans to play baseball, to find one super person who was so willing to, who agreed to do the most basic steps and yet succeed beyond all expectations. And again, the same technique that Eugénie employed to get women the right to be educated in France.
Yeah, and you're right. There's so much of this book which is in fact so contemporary. She's such a contemporary figure. I mean, there's several things I think that's of interest, that they had a very equal marriage, and whether or not she loved him at the beginning, I think without doubt they had an incredibly successful working partnership and relationship. Yes. And you managed to convey not just what she did, but how she did it, and also how full of life and how fun she was, how opinionated she was, which no doubt counted against her in terms of her lasting reputation, at least in the 19th century. But there's one particular area which I think is very instructive to what she was like as a person, and I'd love you to talk us through, and that's her relationship with her image and her clothes, which could have been a way to belittle her in the way that women still today are so often judged by what they're wearing and what they look like. But she managed to turn that into one of her strongest and most powerful really forms of communication. So I'd love you to talk to us a bit about that.
One of the really extraordinary things about it is that perhaps because she was not interested in clothes, not interested in fashion, she knew how to take advantage of it and use it, not just as something to adorn herself, to make herself look beautiful, but as something far bigger than that, to sell France to the world as a place where you could buy and come and see the very best quality, not only of clothes, fashion, etc., but in how it was put together, how it was done. But behind all of this for her was that this was an industry where women could be employed, where women could find jobs that allowed them to earn some money, to allow them to develop their own skills. There were, of course, the basic things that all women had to learn of sewing, but it went far beyond that because it led to design opportunities, it led to understanding of business. It was just a wonderful vehicle for bringing women into the workforce and into life in a much broader sense than they had been. But beyond that, even the way Eugénie managed to use clothes as political weapons was extraordinary, and it certainly presaged what was to come. It was fashion as a real weapon for her, a political weapon, in that she knew she could carry off certain things. I mean, look at her first foreign trip. It was to Great Britain, to England.
Wearing the tartan, very, very smart.
She wore a tartan dress. She knew Victoria had just bought Balmoral and was interested in establishing Scotland as an important aspect of life in Great Britain. Tartan was the way to do it. And then when she came back to France, she again wore a tartan dress to say, look, these are now our friends. They're no longer our traditional foe. They're the people we're working with. And if we work with them, we can have trade in fabric and in all kinds of other things. And it was an aspect of her personality that that was encouraged and really developed by her husband as well, who said, you're representing France. You're not just representing you. And she then went on to use what she wore as a weapon for political, political calmness, with the silk weavers in Lyon, who were very much anti-monarch, anti-centralized government, and yet these people who had protested for years and years, she showed up wearing not only one of the gowns they had woven, but then sat down and operated one of their looms to prove hey, I'm one of you.
I loved that, and you write about how the silk workers erupted in cheers. And one thing I learned, I had no idea. At the time, Lyon had 300,000 people population, and a third of them, I think it was 90,000, worked in the silk industry. So that ability of hers to find a way to bring them onto her side was way, as you say, way more important than simply an acceptance of the jobs in the industry for clothes, but actually helping her husband and the third empire, help me out here, Petie. Helping the Napoleonic empire.
Well, you know, the whole aspect of selling France. Of selling France to the world, showing that it was the center of things modern, of things of high quality, of luxury, was also reflected in the wine world, because this is when we find the development of the classification system in Bordeaux, 1855. Napoleon III and Eugénie were both very, very interested in the quality of French agriculture, which is essentially what winemaking is. And he was especially fascinated by making sure that what was sold represented quality and that people knew how to find that out. And hence the development of the 1855 classification system.
Yes, and that is, you're right, many of our listeners here who will come to you through Wine and War or through Champagne Charlie will find in this book as well that there really is a deepening of our understanding of what went into the 1855 classification in the wider sense of the Paris exhibition, which of course we know that the England had the Crystal Palace exhibition in 1851, but when you read in this about the friendship that was developing between Victoria and Eugénie and about those visits that were made, you suddenly start to understand, or I certainly did, understand more deeply about how connected those things were and just how important that inspiration was, and also how Eugénie very much took the lead in many of the exhibitions that were being put on in Paris, again particularly with the silk weavers and with fashion, but across many aspects. And she wasn't able to stay for all of it because she was pregnant with her first child, but she was there at the beginning and was such an important figure that she certainly drew a lot of people to Paris. And I want to ask you a bit about that. Writing historical biography, it can be a challenge because obviously you're assigning motivations. She's no longer there to answer any particular questions. Were there big gaps in the research where you had to, kind of fill in, or was she such an important historical figure that actually the archives were there, they just hadn't been properly used before?
It was a combination of both, Jane, from the standpoint that there is a lot of material available. On the other hand, there's nothing really that spends much time on her individually and her involvement, because it was very patriarchal, to the point where when she would make a visit to a hospital or an orphanage, it would be reported in the press, but often they would use an engraving that made sure that her husband was shown with her there, even though he had not attended the event or whatever she was doing at that institution. So it was sorting through the archives that turned out not always to be so accurate, and also looking at a bunch of more personal things, the letters, etc., because it was trying to figure out why she was doing what she was doing and when and how this all fit together. So much of that was lost. And at one of the most important places in her time as Empress, the Château de Compiègne, Evelyne and I were there at least twice to go through archives. The amount on Eugénie was almost nil. They had a lot on her son. No, her son, the Prince Impérial, lived, to 26. he was a child at the chateau. The imbalance is there, and in favor of the male side of everything.
Where did you find the richest seam of archives of research?
There were a couple of places that were really, really good. One was at Arenenberg in Switzerland, where Napoleon III spent much of his youth. There are the letters that Eugénie wrote, and are mostly in a book done in the 1930s by the then Duke of Alba.
Who married, well, a previous Duke of Alba married Eugenie's sister.
Eugenie's older sister. The most surprising place, I don't think one would expect to find the archives, a dental school at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. But this is because of her long and very close relationship with her dentist, beginning from when she first came to Paris as a young girl, and continuing on to the point where he became the one who essentially saved her life.
I loved, by the way, how American dentists were seen as the best in the world and sought after even in the mid-19th century. That really made me laugh. You've given a couple of really useful kind of hints there for people who are writing narrative non-fiction or biography or these wonderful looks into intersections of different industries in history, which is, don't always believe the archives that you see, first of all, particularly the official version of events. They're not always accurate. And then to really try and fill out around every aspect of their life and how, I mean, that's such a fascinating and wonderful achievement that you're able to do in this book. Are there any historical periods that you still hope to explore in the future?
Well, Don and I would really love to have an opportunity to go back to South Africa and write about the wines of South Africa under apartheid. We were lucky enough to live there for a couple of years, a couple of very exciting years at the time, just before Nelson Mandela was released from prison and up and through the first open election in South Africa. And it gave us also an opportunity then to try some of the wines and to talk to some of the winemakers. It is a very fraught period when people who were trying to make good wine had to smuggle in clones to make the wines, etc. So it would be really exciting to be able to do that, to go back and spend some more time there and do some work on wine during that time.
Do you know, it's amazing. I often say that I don't think I'd be writing about wine today if I hadn't visited South Africa in 1996, so a little bit after the time you were there, but only 2 years since the first free elections. And I was just there for 3 weeks, but the incredible sense that you were there at a moment of history, and this incredible combination of politics and pain and opportunity and potential is something that marked me so much coming in as a writer, that it made me interested in writing about wine. So I would adore to read something that you and Don do on that period, I can tell you now. So if we just move more widely, is there a particular bottle or a vintage that holds a special meaning for you, maybe for both of you, and why?
One of the most exciting bottles of wine we ever had was the 1905 Chateau Latour, and we drank it in 1985. A dear friend of ours, a woman in fact who appears in Wine and War, an American woman who lived in Paris during World War II, was turning 80. She was a great wine lover, and her husband had accumulated a very nice cave, primarily Burgundies, but also some very nice Bordeauxs, which she kept and tried to refresh through the years after his death. So when Gertrude turned 80, we decided it was the moment to open this bottle of wine from her birth year, and it was absolutely fabulous. Gertrude was thrilled with it. so thrilled that when Don decided to pick up the bottle and clear at the end of the meal, she reached out and slapped his hand and said, "What do you think you're doing?" And Don said, it's only sediment left in the bottle. And she said, "Put that down, pour it into my glass. I'm going to drink every bit of it." And she did.
A beautiful way to show that we really are drinking history when we're drinking mature vintages of those wonderful wines. Petie, thank you so much for sharing all this with us. I think my last question, we need to go back to Eugénie just briefly. If you have one takeaway from this book and one story maybe of her that you'd love to share with people, what would it be?
One story, but maybe impossible, but one takeaway is the absolute determination, the absolute strength of this woman, and what she was able to accomplish, and how committed she was to doing what she believed in. I think it was the inspiration from her, as much as anything, that I think both Evelyne and I felt working on it. It was very, very hard to remember that she lived so long ago, because she was so modern, and because we thought, gee, wouldn't it be fun to sit down and chat for a bit?
Wouldn't it be? And talking of modern, one of my memories of this book, or of Eugénie, is when she was on roller skates. When she somehow managed to get hold of and decide to popularise, or just, I expect just for her own fun. She probably just thought, I want to see what it's like, and was on roller skates. And I loved the idea that at the time, roller skates, I guess they only had 2 wheels, and so you couldn't really stop them. You could only go forward or fall over. And so she got her footmen or to be kind of waiting on either side, so that if she fell, they would catch her and put her back up again. I loved that.
I had a feeling that probably Napoleon III said, "You can't, don't you dare fall down." And probably put those guys there to catch her.
Yeah.
But she was such a daredevil, such an athlete. She ice skated, so it was only natural when she heard about roller skates, she would have to try.
She'd want to try them. Yeah, well, honestly, thank you for sharing this woman with us and bringing the story to her. For people who are listening from the UK, I'd had no idea that the last 50 years of her life were spent in England, and that she was really best friends with Queen Victoria, to the point that they called each other sister, and they didn't have to curtsy to each other in the end because they knew each other so well. And another story that I loved was when women were wearing big crinoline skirts, Eugénie got the door in her house in England widened to such an extent that both of them, Victoria and her, could walk through at the same time, because before that they spent so long saying, "You first, no, you first, no, you first." I mean, you just found the most wonderful stories. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this.
I have one thing to add to that, and that is, you think about these 2 women sitting there wondering, okay, Victoria was English, broken English, Eugénie was Spanish. They always spoke French to each other. And I found that fascinating. A second language to both, and that was how they communicated. The other thing is that you saw the book is published in the United States by HarperCollins, Hanover Square. We've just sold rights to Duckworth in the UK, so it will be out in the UK as well soon.
Excellent, that's wonderful. And I hope in France as well, because the French deserve to know what an awesome woman Eugénie was. So thank you.
More.
Thank you, Petie. And I look forward to seeing you soon. And that was just wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks again, Jane.
Thank you for joining us today as we spoke with Petie Kladstrup, author of The Last Empress of France. You can find show notes and further information on janeanson.com. Please let us know via social media or the website what you thought of the podcast, of our conversation, and also of the book, which I really recommend you get hold of. Please look out for upcoming episodes, because we have lots of plans to interview other authors who are writing about wine or who just love wine. And let us know if there are any particular people that you would like us to interview. Thank you, and see you soon.